So, this happened.
I had a teacher from Delaware share with me that he has students that just, the teacher will explain a task and the kids will say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not interested in that.
Hooked yet? Well, I'm Ainsley. I'm your host for ACTFL Voices. And my counterpart here, Christine.
Hi, it's me.
Join us as we talk about the teaching of language and everything in between. Brought to you by the ACTFL Annual Convention and World Languages Expo. Please visit www.actful.org for more information. Well, it's ACTFL Voices. Today we're speaking with Leslie Grahn, 27 years of language teaching experience at the middle and the high school levels, 12 years experience at the central office level, and most recently as a coordinator of world languages for the Howard County Public School System in Maryland. She's respected in the community. She's going to be joining us today to talk interactions since COVID, how teaching has changed and how learning has changed. Before I forget, make sure to stay to the end of this podcast for more information about ACTFL. Let's dive in. So, Leslie, what's your COVID experience?
So I was very worried about teachers here in the US during COVID. Being a former language teacher and also a former supervisor of languages, I was worried about suddenly teachers having no classroom and no one knew what the plan was and no one knew what programs they were going to use and all those things. And also the fact that people had really started to get on the path to proficiency and really think about proficiency-based instruction. And now suddenly everything's gone. So your classroom is gone, your regular work schedule is gone. You're sitting in your living room or your dining room with your laptop. Kids are in their homes or having to go to library parking lots to get Wi-Fi. And
Oh,
it
wow.
was just crazy. And so I really worked hard to try and find resources and design resources for teachers, especially world language teachers, to help us through that time. So an example is, in a brick and mortar classroom, you would maybe have expressions on the wall
Sure.
and things all around kids, and they no longer had that. So I designed virtual word walls for all the different languages so that teachers could still have that kind of feeling that words were all around the kids when they were meeting with them virtually. And so those kind of things where I was just constantly thinking about how can I help? How can I help? I think it comes from a place for me where I have always had lots of collaboration and networking with other teachers throughout my career, also as a leader. And I just value it a lot. And in fact, I call what I do professional generosity, right? So that whole idea that I'm willing to share anything that I have if it might make your life a little easier, because we know how overwhelming,
Yeah,
stressed, how people are feeling right now in the classroom.
that's very true. I've never really thought about that. Sometimes the magic word to share, you don't hear that much anymore. It's not a common theme. And I'm glad for teachers they have this ability to reach out and talk to each other. I noticed that you said you had some survey results that you scoured from the web. What were your results?
So, since we've returned from COVID, lots of teachers are reporting that the things they were doing before COVID are no longer working with the
Uh,
students who are
That
physically
makes
in their
sense.
classrooms now. And trying to figure out like who is this Generation Z or the I generation.
mm,
And so I was hearing all kinds of things from teachers about kids not wanting to look up and actually talk to someone else, which is kind of important in a language classroom.
hmm
Um, Kids who
A
are
little.
just refusing to work. And so it really gave me an impetus to want to, okay, let me figure out what people are saying. And there's not a whole lot of research out there post-COVID, just because it's not that many years since COVID
Right.
at this point. But I started Googling, I started looking, I found some Gallup surveys. It was called Voices on Generation Z. I took a look at the high school survey of student engagement, and there's a middle school survey of student engagement as well. And
Okay.
I was looking at those kids' results. And then I also was just looking for articles that were out there, and some of the titles of the articles tell you what's going on. So
Right.
one is called Students Are Less Engaged, Stop Blaming COVID, right?
There's
Another one is
totally.
Distracted, Bored, and Disengaged, How to Re-engage Generation Z Learners. And so that whole idea that everyone was feeling this kind of disengagement. So I came up with the idea of like, what if I dug for teachers, because most teachers don't have time to dig on the web for this kind of information,
Right.
and put together some big ideas. And so I called it cracking the code. So what's the code? How do we get into the having our students be engaged in the learning in the classroom? We can be doing everything we're supposed to be doing, all the high leverage teaching practices, all of the things that ACTFL shares with us as far as standards and guiding principles. But if no one's paying attention,
Mm-hmm.
it's not
That's the
working.
point. Yeah,
And
what's the
Yeah.
so
point?
what I found is that all of these ideas, the articles, the surveys, the research I was able to uncover came down to three big ideas. Those ideas are belonging,
Okay.
autonomy,
Mm-hmm.
and peer connection.
Okay.
That makes sense.
And so I tried to then think about, okay, so what does that look like in a world language classroom?
Mhm.
Mm. I was going to blame Christine for all this COVID stuff, but it seemed like it was some other.
That makes sense. It probably was me. I was in Mexico and like traveling a little bit. Came back, you know.
So we
Uh,
cracked the code in these big three. Do you want to go into these big three?
Sure, sure. So the first one is belonging. And
Sure.
so that whole idea that students, it's not that you just know their name, but they
Mm.
also want to feel like they belong to some sort of mini community in your classroom, and that there's a kind of interdependence that you're establishing as a
Mm.
teacher where we need each other to accomplish what it is we're trying to do. And so, what are we doing about that in the classroom? And a lot of us spend lots of time doing that at the beginning of the school year where we're getting to know
Right.
our students. But
yeah.
actually, it's an effort that needs to go on throughout
Continue.
the school year,
Correct.
and really making kids feel like they're being heard, making kids feel like that they're part of that community. I think we can do a lot to, and pepper in these ideas of community building activities and regularly celebrating with our students. So
Right.
celebrating our achievements, celebrating birthdays, and that whole idea about it's much more than my teaching you whatever the content is. And one of my favorite mantras right now is, do students view your curriculum as something you're going to do to them
Mm.
or something they have a voice in?
And we're in the ACTFL Voices podcast, so
That
hopefully
makes
there's a
sense.
voice in
Exactly.
there.
Exactly.
No, that's
Uh,
that's great. So what was the next one?
So the second big idea that came out of all of this is autonomy.
Mm.
And that's that idea that students feel like they have some kind of control
Yeah.
over what's going on in the classroom. They feel like that they have choices. They feel like that they have voice in the classroom. And again, it kind of goes back to that mantra of, do they have a voice in what's happening? And so an example is, are you allowing students to co-create the norms of the classroom?
Hmm.
So instead of telling
Uh,
students, this is how things are going to work in the classroom, this is how things are going to work when we work in groups, this is how you can kind of give out lists of rules.
Yeah.
Instead, involve students in creating those norms, and then they feel ownership of it,
I
right?
needed
I
that
like
when I was a kid.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. They were not doing that in the 90s. We were just
No.
told what to do. You get what you get. You don't throw a fit. Oh man, I love that.
I
That's
had a
great.
teacher who had a meter stick. He would just slam it on the desk when he wanted quiet. It was like, "Tsh, tsh, tsh," and I was just like,
Yeah,
where am I? It felt
yeah.
kind of normal, but not normal at the same time.
Funny. I had the same teacher.
But no, that's great. Autonomy. And after autonomy, what else did you have there, Leslie?
A little bit more about autonomy and that
Oh, sure.
whole idea about are we regularly surveying our students?
Mm.
So finding out what worked for you today.
Oh,
Now, the reality is 27 years in the classroom for myself, 21 of those in middle school. So you can kind of think about
oh
that a little
yeah.
bit. And students want to feel like you're listening to them. So saying things like, what did you like about today's lesson? Kids are going to say nothing, right? They didn't like any of
Right.
it.
Yeah.
But instead, if you focus them in on what helped you learn during this lesson? So think about the different kinds of tasks we did. So
Hmm.
we sometimes worked with a partner, we did an interactive game, we worked by ourselves. Which of those task types helped you learn the best? So it brings student focus onto the learning, right? And
Right.
feeling a kind of accountability. I think going with that would be things like making sure students know how to self-assess.
Okay.
The rubrics are not something that is a secret, but
Mm.
instead everybody knows what the rubrics have on them, and that students have an opportunity to judge their own work on the rubrics and even teach students how to give peer feedback. And that's one of the big things that came out of the data was that idea that students want feedback. They want meaningful feedback on how am I doing? So not just 10 points or an A, but they're looking for what did I do well?
Hmm.
And what might I do next time to make it better? And I think that's a key piece for them is that whole idea of self-assessment, peer feedback,
Hmm.
that kind of a feedback cycle that happens in
Yeah.
the classroom so that I'm not just planning lessons because of the content, but I'm also taking into account what the learners are saying work for them, how close or far away they say they are from the reaching the can-do statements for the lesson.
Hmm.
And so really empowering students through that. And I think that autonomy, again, makes students feel like that they're contributing in some way. Another phrase I took out of the articles and data I went through is the kid said, um, we no longer want to be seen as consumers of information. We want to be seen as producers
A kid said this.
of information.
Wow.
So think about it now. Lots of people are on social media. They're
Mhm.
calling themselves content creators, right? And that's how
Yeah.
these kids
That's
see
true.
themselves. They're posting on TikTok, they're posting on Instagram and other sites. And that whole idea about what can I create? What action can I take
Mm.
to with this information you gave me? I'm not just learning this content for the audience of my teacher, right? Because that's not
Right.
very fulfilling to kids. And
Not
so
at
that
all.
whole idea about how is what I'm going to figure out through this content going to help my school, my community, my state, right? And so thinking wider than or beyond the classroom.
No, that's great. It kind of just reminds me, even I think every generation goes through this where the new generation starts making up their own words and starts to do all these self-defining things. Back in the day, it was like you were he's the Mac Daddy. They don't say that anymore, but like it's just, you do want autonomy. You own something, especially with language. There's a lot
Mhm.
of ownership in language, and then sharing that with others is huge. No, that's a great, great, great point.
Continuing to talk about autonomy, are we asking students? So let's say that we're learning a unit on free time activities. So we're going to speak in the target language about what do you do in your free time? How do you spend your weekends?
Sure.
What's your favorite things to do? And typically we would have a vocabulary list of
Mm.
different kinds of free time activities students might do. But the reality is that it's quite possible that there are daily activities or fun free time activities students do that are not on the list. So
Oh.
now I can't really talk about what I do because you did not give me the words I needed to talk about.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so that whole idea about, okay, let's give students some priority vocabulary, or some people call them core vocabulary. So everybody
Mm.
will know these words. Now, what do you want to know how to say?
Right.
So turning it around and allow for student generated vocabulary. What do you do that is not on the list that you need in order to talk about what you do? And so again, it's making the curriculum something students feel like they have a voice in instead of, no, I'm sorry, you just have to learn these 15 things, right?
Right.
Instead,
Yeah.
it gives me a way, because really, when you learn a language, one of the first things you want to be able to do is talk about yourself.
Yeah.
So I need the words to do that.
Why do I need to know how to say apple in 7 languages like I do when I need to know how to ask where the restroom is or any? That makes so much more sense to, yeah, ask
It,
them what they need.
it
And
also, yeah, it brings to light, sorry, it also brings to light that when you talk about something you like to do, you tend to expand that discipline.
well, and also giving students credit that they're going to come up with ideas that I couldn't think of as a teacher, right? So
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of as many ideas as possible. And so why not let kids brainstorm? What would you like to talk about on this topic? What things would you, what things are curious, what are you curious about in terms of the target culture and this topic? Because
Mm,
kids want to know, do kids in other countries, are they on the same social media platforms? Do they follow the same influencers? Do they have the same school day as us? Do they, right?
right.
That's what they're interested in. And so are we making sure we're letting them tell us, like, what are you curious about? Like when I say food, what are you wondering? And so
Right.
allowing them to have that wonder and that curiosity again gives them investment in the learning because they're directing some of the learning by requesting certain discussion topics or topics that might be discussed in little groups or something like that, where they feel like they're helping to create the learning in the classroom.
Wow. So the belonging, the autonomy, and the peer connection kind of comes through with this and the support. You get more
Right.
on that?
Yeah, I do. So when we talk about peer connection and support, it's that idea that every kid should not feel like they're in the class as an individual by themselves.
Mm,
But I think I mentioned earlier that idea of interdependence. So we need each other in order to accomplish the learning. And so making sure that our environment supports that. And so are we often having students work in pairs, work in small groups, depend on someone else for to accomplish something. So a performance or a product or something like
hmm.
that. And what we know is that students, especially students that have diverse needs, working with someone else is also a kind of scaffold or support for them
Yeah.
because I get to have models through my classmates of what does this sound like when we talk about it? What does this look like when we write about it? And so making sure we're offering those opportunities. And then one thing I talk about with teachers is when you design tasks. So, for example, there's something we do called Find Someone Who, right? So it looks like a bingo board,
Mm,
and you say,
Oh,
Find someone
that's
who
fun.
likes broccoli, find somebody who likes pizza,
Oh,
find
that's so
somebody, right?
fun.
Some people call those
Gamification.
human bingo. And so we do Find Someone Who. Not only are students practicing the language, they're actually building connections with their classmates
right.
because they're finding commonalities with the people around them. And again, that strengthens the community. So what I encourage people to do is, when you create these communicative tasks, is there an affective layer
Mm,
where we're still building the connections, we're still building the belonging, we're still building the community throughout. And that's not something we have to voice to the kids, but in our minds, we know that this is going to help them feel more connected to each other.
that makes sense. And that's
Great.
kind of like the way you adapt the lesson plan, as I see that you wrote here. It's also knowing your students, and it's engaging is knowing your students well enough to be able to implement these things, or even you can think ahead. You're like, well, I know this person's into this. I bet when they meet and talk about this would be great. Oh no, that's pretty awesome. No, I really like that, Leslie. What if this doesn't work anymore, even if it's a new idea?
Mhm. What I encourage teachers to do is, you can go to conventions as the ACTFL convention coming up, right? We can go to
Hmm.
conferences. We can go to just PD in our districts And a lot of times we leave those feeling like we're weighed down with all of these new ideas.
Right.
And so I
Right.
encourage people to choose one thing, and you're going to judge it on two, I call it a two-part litmus test. So one, how did it impact student learning? And two, how did it impact student engagement?
Mm.
If the new strategy I implemented was a positive on both, that's something I should keep.
Mhm.
If it was kind of meh, on these two ideas, maybe I need to adapt it and try it again. If it did not work in either parts of the litmus test, I need to throw that away. And
Mm.
so instead of seeing your toolbox as continuing to be overflowing, we need to be willing to throw some things out that just don't work for my students.
Right.
Yeah.
It might work in other
And your
places,
current
in other
students.
schools. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, what have I figured out about these types of strategies? And we always, adjust strategies, right? We make them work for us, but there's going to be times that I feel like I'm being overwhelmed by them. And so, I think one of the best ideas is to, when you try something, you're going to know whether it worked well or not. You're going to tell from the energy in the room. You're going to be able to tell from what the kids produce. And we do have kids, and this is really one of the big reasons why I started looking into this. I had a teacher from Delaware share with me that he has students that just, the teacher will explain a task and the kids will say, well, I'm not going to do that.
Mm.
I'm not interested in that. And I'm like, whoa, like maybe they did that before, but they only thought it. They didn't say it out loud.
Yeah. I would have never spoken up in that way.
But
No way.
there is some
Brave.
information out there on work refusal.
Wow.
And I did dig into that because that was this one teacher's real concern, was that kids are just saying, no, this doesn't, I'll just not do it.
Mm.
And we know that behind work refusal is that whole fear of failure
True.
Okay.
and a
That makes
fear
sense.
of judgment, that I'll
Yeah.
be judged if I don't have it perfect, right? And anxiety about where I am in the community, in the room, right? So how I'm seen by others as being a
Right.
stronger or weaker student or whatever. And that whole idea about teachers need to make sure that we have that very low affective filter in our classrooms where we take risks, we make mistakes, and it's all good, right?
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
judging each other. The way you learn language is to practice with it and play with it. And we'll
Yeah.
laugh. And sometimes we'll realize something we said was funny, but it's not something where I feel bad for trying, because we all start out as novices. And so that
Yeah.
whole idea about this is going to be a safe place where we can make mistakes, we can ask questions, we can get help, right? From my classmates or from my teacher. But the idea is that I'm going to be safe here. I feel safe emotionally, psychologically, right, in this classroom. And again, that's where that whole community building happens. That's
Mm.
where that whole emphasis on belonging helps.
Yeah, especially after COVID. Like we
Yes.
walked away from that subject, and I was like, yeah, that was really important for, especially for those students that weren't around other students for a while. And you put them in the classroom, and all of a sudden they said, okay, what am I doing here? And with language, it's the first thing you learn. It's your foundation of learning. If you skip it, you skip a lot of critical thinking. And how do you get students to think, okay, no, language is important for me? Because sometimes they're going to go to STEM. Oh, I need to do this and do that. Well, it'd be great if you can explain some of your science and your research in a way. If you want to be an influencer, this is very much the point, where you have to be able to prove points well. No, that's quite great. So I'm going to put you on the spot for a quick second, Leslie.
A quick message from our sponsor. Did you know that ACTFL is launching the Integrated Performance Assessment Workshop? The Integrated Performance Assessment, also known as the IPA, is an innovative way to evaluate learners within the World Readiness Standards framework. Begin with understanding the IPA cycle to include interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational tasks. Also learn how to design and implement IPAs, including the selection of context and level-appropriate authentic texts. Participants will also learn how to use rubrics to evaluate communicative performance in conjunction with co-constructed feedback sessions. So, if you'd like to request this workshop, please send an email to plc@actful.org. Get to the IPA. Not the beer, of course. I'll see you in class.
It's not a big spot. Not a big spot. But didn't know if you had a story of any point that was kind of like successful of how the student probably improved or changed, maybe from another teacher, maybe in your classroom, or anything that pops to mind.
So, I share with teachers that I always saw students as locks. So they were all these little locks in the classroom. And that my job as their teacher was to figure out which key opened which locks. And so I'm going to try out some things, and some locks are going to get unlocked, and then some locks still stay locked.
Right.
And so then I'm going to try something else. So my goal is to get all of the locks to unlock. So that's when we start thinking about differentiated instruction, varying my approaches, things like that, which cause us to be creative, right?
Yeah.
And so we go outside the box and we think about, well, what might be more engaging to these kids? And so I think making sure that we're not leaving a bunch of kids behind, because we could keep moving forward with the locks that I unlocked.
Right.
Because these are typically going to be your most enthusiastic learner, that are raising their hands all the time and all of that. But it was important to me that every single kid, I could find the key to their lock. And what's nice about teaching is you find out that certain strategies work for more than one student. So it's not like I'm looking for 35 different strategies, but we just have to pay attention to what works and what doesn't work with kids. And I think that's that piece that people who don't teach do not understand what we do.
Right.
And that's because we don't just take a textbook, we don't just take a curriculum and then deliver it.
So much more. Yeah.
We are adapting it, we are customizing it, we are thinking about the students in the room. And in 27 years of teaching, and I can't imagine how many students that amounts to, I never had a single class that was like any other class, because every class is different. The human dynamic is different in every class. And therefore, the way I approach the teaching and learning in the classroom has to look a little different.
I mean, that really resonates with me when I started working with ACTFL and learning about language proficiency, because I was in a grammar-focused classroom. And we started off, when I was kindergarten learning French, we started off with at least 26 to 28 students. By the time I graduated, it was like 13 of us left.
Wow.
And the application of one way was the only way. All of our studies in French, and then we had English class, a couple times a week. But absolutely makes sense.
And one other thing that I think about a lot is that if we were a company, like a big corporation or a business, something like that, we would be constantly studying our clientele.
Right.
Always.
Right.
Analyzing.
So Starbucks, everybody, right? So they're out there going, all right, what new flavor should we add to our coffees that the people out there are saying they wish they had? And we need to do the same, because I feel like we can get in a rut where we say, well, in level 2, we always teach this topic. And it's like, okay, but is that interesting to today's students?
Right.
And that's a big piece that came through the surveys as well. They want to talk about things that matter, not, so I don't teach kids food for them to walk into the grocery store and point at food and name it, right? No one does that.
True.
So why am I learning this? Am I learning this to talk about hunger? Am I learning this to talk about food deserts? Am I learning this to talk about veganism and vegetarianism? Why am I learning this? And I think asking ourselves these questions, lots of people are moving towards, for example, aligning their curriculum to the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Oh.
So there's 17 of those goals, and every topic you can ever think of falls under one of those goals, right?
Really?
And it's all about there should be no poverty, there should be no hunger, everyone should have a house, right? Those kind of ideas. And so when I'm teaching about house, it has to be more than pointing out the rooms in my house and what's in them.
Right.
It needs to be about a bigger idea, and especially with Generation Z, where they want to know, so what do I do with this? Like, how is this helping me solve a homelessness problem? How does this help me think about those who are in need? You know, those kinds of ideas that they want to take action with what they're learning. And I think that's a shift for us
Yeah.
as language educators. And we need to be thinking about beyond our classroom, how are students taking action, doing something, creating something that can make a difference to others.
That is true. This brings a question up to me for me though. I love your approach. Have you ran into parents with a different approach?
Personally, no, but I'm sure that just as when we shift to proficiency-based instruction as a supervisor, I got all kinds of calls from parents saying, why is the teacher speaking in Spanish the whole time? And we had to help them see that maybe the way they learned language
Right.
was more about language. And now we're teaching kids how to use language, right? To function with the language. So be able to go outside and interact with other people. And so I think any kind of shift like that becomes uncomfortable for people who like things the way they always were.
Yeah.
And so what I think is important is that we're explaining that to people. Because that's why, you know, we don't have a national curriculum. We have standards, but we don't have a national curriculum because it doesn't really matter what you teach. The themes you're teaching are the vehicles by which students are gaining language proficiency, right? And then I'm making those tasks more and more rigorous as they go across the proficiency continuum. And that's what matters. There's nothing on the can-do statements that says, must know their colors or must know parts of a house.
Right.
And that's what's important here is that what students are doing with what they've learned and how are they functioning with it? How can they go out there in the world and use it or online, right? So out on social media and use what they've learned.
That makes sense. I mean, cracking the code is learning the students and then learning their environments and then learning what engages them. So it's all around work. You know, it's you're not a counselor, but you're a counselor in some ways. And to achieve next goals, you're absolutely right. You have to get them to think differently. You know, if you ask me about food, I think, you know, we'd be happy to have pickle ice cream. I think all the kids would love that. Hey, you know what? Let's talk about pickle ice cream.
I would say you just made a new recipe right there on the spot.
Well, it may not work for many people, but I bet you there are a few pregnant women that are probably like, yeah.
Hey,
that's
call
not a
Ben
bad
and Jerry.
I was going to say, they've already got 32. They can do 33. Yeah.
Well, Leslie, this is very eye-opening. Do you have any other points you want to bring out before we close up?
Just that I really appreciate that ACTFL is doing this. I think it's great for other language professionals to hear discussions like this, to participate in discussions like this.
Yeah.
So that we're just putting more and more out there in the world for people to benefit from, for people to learn from. And I'm just such a big believer in the idea that we can depend on each other.
Yeah.
And that we can be generous to each other and kind of take care of each other. And I think that's unique in our profession.
Yeah.
And it's something that I value a lot.
I definitely, I think the first thing I learned with ACTFL when I attended the convention the first time, I was like, oh, they really want to see each other. They really want to talk about this. They really want to hang out. And overall, we'd love to see ACTFL do more of these things and these podcasts. And you've been great. This has been very, very helpful. You have any resources you want to cite, anything, or how people can reach you, or what works?
So I have a website, granforlang.com. So my last name, Grahn, and then for as in foreign, lang as in language. where I have lots of resources under probably every topic you could ever think of for language teachers. I also am on Pinterest. I have over 20,000 pins on Pinterest
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
that are all
Wow.
organized by theme or by
Wow.
pedagogical idea, right? Like flexible grouping, classroom management, things like that. And
Wow.
I collect authentic resources for multiple languages. So for my friends who are listening, who speak language or who teach languages that maybe they don't feel like they have a lot to choose from out there, I try very hard to include you in my resources as well. And I actually have some resources that will align directly with our conversation today
Sure.
that I'll be happy to share the link for with you, and we can put that online.
And a matter of fact, the website for Leslie is going to be Grahn with an H. So it's www.grahn for lang.com. And the Pinterest is okay. Grahn for Lang is the same. So GRAHN
I
for
love
Lang
Pinterest.
and Pinterest. Yeah,
Love
I'm
Pinterest.
glad you collect those things. I collect clothes, but they're not categorized. So
Not at all. My Pinterest is just a Mod Podge. You don't know what you're looking for. So I'm just amazed that you had spent time to organize all of that.
No, I just go thrifting a lot. Like I'll just go in the store and buy stuff. I'm like, oh, I need to put my colors together, and then, yeah. So maybe I am. I need to be working on that and do better. Leslie, this
You
has
get
been great.
inspiration.
This has been great, Leslie. Really awesome. Thank you for being the first person to do this with us, and we're going to do many, many more. I think this would be great for the community. Any last words?
Um, I think that when we listen to things like this, just to make sure that you feel validated by some of it.
Mhm.
So you are doing some of these things already. So when you hear from someone else, it's not always about things you're not doing. We should feel validated by some of these conversations and then also challenged by some of
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
How did I challenge your thinking or challenge your pedagogy, the way you think about your lesson plan, et cetera, through the conversation?
I really appreciate the conversation. Like I said, my family's all in education. So hearing the new kind of ideas and how it's so student focused is really interesting because even as me as a student, I learned so differently than my classmates. And I felt often like kind of didn't, blend well. So it's so nice that you're including them in that. So I'm really excited where that's going and I appreciate all of it.
Well, this is awesome. And I concur with all of your statements. I have nothing to add to that. And I'm really happy for this. So thank you guys. I
Agreed.
really appreciate it.
You're
For sure.
welcome.
Hey, you still there? ACTFL Voices is for anyone at any level of language teaching looking to improve their language teaching skills, knowledge, or research on language learning. Real-world, authentic language stories and resources from all levels of language education, K through 12 or higher learning. Get involved at plc@actful.org. That is plc@actfl.org. What do you want to talk about? Who would you recommend we interview? We also offer sponsorship opportunities on our broadcast, so get in contact with us. We're here for you, and always remember, the future speaks through us. Until next time.